That drone that just took off behind me is headed to Russia. Only the commander knows where exactly. Before they get the official feedback, the intel, they look on Telegram to see whether these drones have reached their target.
Russian social media is full of videos like this one, which shows Ukrainian long-range FP-1 drones hitting Russia's biggest oil refinery in Omsk, a city that's almost 2,500 kilometers from Ukraine's borders. 9 of Russia's 10 biggest refineries have been hit this summer. This is Moscow, and this is the Tatarstan region, just 2 of dozens of attacks in recent weeks.
Дивіться, стало фізично більше підрозділів, які працюють цим, і стало фізично кратно більше засобів. І їх буде ще більше. Тому тут немає якихось спеціальних речей. Це монотонна робота. Зараз такий час, і це такого рівня технології, коли кількість, вона впливає на якість.
But it's not just a question of sending enough drones and hoping that some make it through.
Монотонно вибивалися їхні системи ППО і інші системи, які нам заважали. Ну і це вже зараз має той ефект, що ми можемо більш, скажімо, якісно проходити ці рубежі і, відповідно, засобів може долітати в якійсь мірі більше. Не вистачає і ще більше не буде вистачати, як тільки у нас масовано, а у нас точно це з'явиться на 3000 кілометрів і більше засоби, то, звісно, їм буде складно.
Oil facilities aren't the only targets. Experts say ammunition storage, weapons plants and ports, as well as refineries, have all been hit by FP-1 drones. And they're not just hitting targets across European Russia. They're also going deep into Siberia. DW got rare access to a launch of these FP-1 drones at a secret location. Since the start of this war, Ukraine has been looking for weapons able to strike deep inside Russia, to compensate for the fact that Russia has always been able to hit anywhere in Ukraine. At first, it looked like cruise missiles such as the UK's Storm Shadow and Germany's Taurus were the only option. But now these drones built in Ukraine are doing the job, except much more cheaply and with simpler technology.
There are lots of things here that we are not allowed to show you. Faces, anything too technical, anything that would allow Russia to copy these weapons, to intercept them better, and to stop Ukraine making them.
We meet the man in charge of the launch, who we're calling Taras.
Ми не відмовляємося ні від чого. Все, що спроможно знищувати ворога, ми завжди вітаємо і раді в себе бачити. В тому числі Тауруси, Шторм Шейдоу, скальпи і інші засоби.
But until more of those are available, Ukraine will carry on taking out Russia's economy with weapons it can produce at home.
Це все, що збільшує спроможність агресора вести війну. Все буде знищено. Це все. Інфраструктура, військова, промислова, все, що допомагає ворогу агресувати проти нас.
These long-range drones have turned what used to be Russia's strength into a weakness, its size. Russian generals used to be able to rely on distance to protect their refineries and weapons plants, and if they could be hit, it would be too expensive to do so routinely. Now that Ukraine's drones are regularly reaching the Urals and Siberia, Russia's military is having difficulty to track, let alone intercept those Ukrainian drones once they cross the front lines. Ukrainian aviation expert Valery Romanenko thinks Russia will struggle to ever produce enough air defense systems to fully close the skies over its huge landmass.
В нас менше території, ми можемо це зробити, а спробуйте на російських просторах. Тут бачу дрон, який летить український, а тут він повернув чи заховався десь за гірку, тут вже не бачу. Через компактність нашої території ми можемо швидко перенацілити винищувачі, швидко перенацілити гелікоптери армійської авіації. Да? В росіян це неможливо. Тобто в росіян серйозні проблеми з регіональною протиповітряною обороною.
Geography isn't the only reason, though, that so many Ukrainian drones are getting through. Even Russia's pro-war military bloggers are criticizing their army for being slow to copy Ukraine's strategy to intercept drones. Russia first used Shahed drones against Ukraine in late 2022. Nearly 4 years on, and Ukraine is downing upwards of 90% of these drones. And now, with systems like these FP-1s, Ukraine is sending drones back across the Russian border in comparable numbers. Valery Romanenko says what Ukraine has done in recent months is nothing intrinsically new. What's changed is that now, 4 years in, Ukraine is finally able to mirror the kind of non-contact warfare that Russia has been waging for years.
Що каже безконтактна війна? Головне – далекобійними засобами знищити ворожу економіку. А після цього без постачання фронт впаде сам по собі. Без палива, без снарядів, без їжі. І росіяни вони вирішили, що вони за допомогою шахедів, крилатих ракет, балістики, це питання вирішить. Але вони прорахувалися, нашим тилом виявився не українська територія, а Європа. Ми звідти почали отримувати озброєння, отримувати фінанси для ведення війни. Да? І тепер ця ситуація є дзеркальною для росіян. Тепер ми виносимо, нас мідл-страйки наші виносять їм ближні тили, діп-страйки наносять удари по найважливішим їхнім об'єктам. І тепер вони жертва безконтактної війни.
Figures speak for themselves. As the number of Ukrainian deep and middle strike attacks on Russia has risen sharply over the course of 2026, the amount of Ukrainian territory that Russian troops have been able to occupy each month has plummeted, down to just 84 square kilometers in June this year, according to Ukrainian monitoring project Deep State. That's 6 times less than Russia was able to occupy in June last year. And these drones are playing a decisive part in that.
And let's bring in now Robert Murrett. He is a former vice admiral in the U.S. Navy and is currently a professor of international affairs at Syracuse University in the U.S. state of New York. Welcome to the program and good to see you again. How surprised are you by the long-range drone capabilities that Ukraine has been able to develop?
Yes, Sarah, great question. Not terribly surprised. It's based on the technology that Ukraine has brought to this battle so far and their ability to pivot very quickly and to do both short range, medium range, and now long range strikes over the vastness of the Russian landmass. And just one final comment on that, I think it's a very difficult problem for Russian air defense because after they get into the areas of central and most recently even into Siberia, very little air defense is out there and very, very difficult to track these Ukrainian drones.
How are you seeing the key factors that has enabled Ukraine to build up its long-range drone capabilities so quickly, so effectively?
Yeah, just their technology, their expertise, just how savvy they are and how they can pivot. And to kind of step back just a little bit, Sarah, we need to recognize that Ukraine has the most battle-hardened and ready, combat-ready military in the world, air, land, and naval. I would give a tip of the hat to the naval side because they've won the battle of the Black Sea, among other things, largely with drones. But their technical expertise, their innovation, their ability to flex in so many ways relative to any kind of military operations, and especially with drone warfare. And a final comment, to manufacture them at scale. President Zelensky has just upped the ante. Currently, their production rate for drones is approximately 10 million drones per year, and now he wants to have a goal of 20 million drones produced every year just by the Ukrainians themselves, which is remarkable and one that they could probably achieve.
And some of these drones, that they're building, they're flying hundreds, even thousands of kilometers without being intercepted by Russian air defenses. How is that possible?
It's actually once they get beyond the initial stages, and when they're launched from Ukraine, get into the Russian landmass and head, the medium and long range ones, including the ones that actually made it all the way to Omsk in Siberia this week. There's really no Russian air defenses to deal with them, quite frankly, because they don't need to. They go over very sparsely populated areas in central and eastern Russian landmass, and there's really no air defenses out there, and they're very difficult to track because they operate at different altitudes, and they also, at the medium range level, come in very large numbers and can swarm and overwhelm air defenses.
We're seeing on both sides, these deep airstrikes, continue to dominate the headlines. And I'm wondering to what extent the focus of this war is now moving away from the front lines, in your view.
To some degree, it is, Sarah. I think that's. I think you articulated it very well. Like the attacks that took place just on Moscow this week in very large numbers of medium-range drones, which are able to overwhelm some things, and also the Ukrainians are being very savvy in terms of the kinds of targets that they're going after, which you could say fall into 3 or so different categories. The short-range ones that are responsible for inflicting, from what the data I've seen, the majority of the casualties on the Russian soldiers on the battlefield. These are very small and short-range ones. The medium range ones that are primarily targeting logistics and and also maritime targets. And then, as we discussed, the long-range ones that are really taking apart the petroleum industry throughout Russia and making refinement and delivery of gasoline and other petroleum products very difficult for the Russian leadership.
We've spoken a lot about the Ukrainian side and how they are adapting. How are you seeing Russia moving to adapt to this changing warfare and finding more effective ways to counter drone capabilities?
I would say not very effectively. The one thing the Russians do have is an inventory of medium-range ballistic missiles, which Ukraine does not have, and they have large inventories of them, which they've been using for some of these horrific strikes on Kyiv and other cities. And the Iranians have difficulty defending against them because of their inventory of Patriot and other missiles, although they've been licensed, as you know, just recently by the United States to manufacture them themselves, which I'm sure they'll figure out pretty quickly in a very Ukrainian style. But there is a little bit of a tilt in Russia's direction because of their inventory of ballistic missiles. And I think I would have to say that Ukraine is balancing that with just the swarms, a large number of very capable medium and long range, not ballistic, but air-breathing missiles, unmanned aircraft rather, that they're able to deploy in extremely large numbers and overwhelm the Russian defenses.
There's a lot of, we have the actual kinetic warfare on the ground. There's a lot of information warfare that's also going on, obviously, between these two parties. Russia has accused Ukraine of using these long-range drones to strike civilian targets. Based on the targets that have been hit by Ukraine, do you see any substance to that accusation?
Two comments I would make, Sarah. One, I think any objective observer would have to say that the Ukrainians are being far more careful in limiting the number of civilian casualties in Russia, what we call collateral damage in the targeting business, than Russia has been. Russia has attacked civilian targets with impunity, so I think it's very lopsided in terms of target analysis for the collateral damage and the number of civilians that Russia has killed compared to the Ukrainian fairly refined targeting posture they've had to go after infrastructure and military targets and logistics. The second point that I would make is in any conflict, as we're seeing in the Middle East and with Russia, Ukraine, and so forth, when you start hurling large amounts of ordnance, you're going to have civilian casualties, no matter how careful you are. And having been in this business for some years, you try to limit any kind of civilian casualties as much as you possibly can. But in any kind of air campaign, when you start using large amounts of ordnance against large numbers of targets, unfortunately, you try to limit the number of civilian casualties you have, which the United States has typically put a lot of effort into in other countries, but there's going to be some civilian casualties.
Robert Murrett, we want to thank you so much for your time and your expertise. We appreciate it.
Good to talk to you, Sarah. Best wishes.